Shri Pranab Mukherjee, there is very little that remains to be said on the competition bill. Madam, this session has seen a very large number of economic legislations being legislated in this House. And competition bill amongst them is not merely the current need, but is also a futuristic legislation. Futuristic because we've so far lived under the MRTP regime. The MRTP law was legislated in 1969 when the regime was more regulated. And the MRTP law, which provided for restrictive trade practices, unfair trade practices, it also moved on the presumption, Mr. Mukherjee said, that size of a corporation was something which was to be eminently discouraged. When the law was originally enacted, size in the business world was almost regarded as evil. This somewhat became anachronic, irrelevant to the present time. We need our corporations today to compete globally. We need them to be very large in size. We also need them to benefit from the economies of scale. But at the same time, we must also take care that there is no abuse of that size that takes place. The second reason why the MRTP Act lost its relevance, because as it was just pointed out, there are areas under the unfair trade practices which have a lot of commonality with the consumer forums. And therefore, that is one jurisdiction which is gradually moving away from the MRTP Commission to the consumer forums itself. What remains now is the restrictive trade practices. And the MRTP Act has 17 trade practices which are referred to as per se restrictive trade practices. Now, a very large number of them in a market-regulated economy perhaps may not even be regarded as restrictive trade practices in the present context. It is in this context that this law, the competition bill, has been legislated. The competition law really has three basic components to it. And the first component, and each of the three, the underlying intention is that in a free market economy or a market-regulated economy, when aberrations start from the market itself, should the economy and the government and the system be helpless in dealing with those aberrations? You give them freedom, but you expect a certain amount of fairness along with that freedom, and that fairness will be ensured by setting a regulatory mechanism and the rules in place which every corporation has to follow. The first component, therefore, which is dealt with under clause 3 of this bill, is the anti-competitive practices. There is a complete prohibition that no corporation, no company shall indulge in any form of anti-competitive practices. And I may mention here that those 17 restrictive trade practices under the MRTP Act have been reduced on a presumption to 4 anti-competitive practices. Now, these are 4 anti-competitive practices which are eminently presumed to be per se anti-competitive. For instance, if large companies which control the market share start regulating the sale price, the object of competition is when competition increases, quality will improve, quantums will improve, prices will come down and the consumer will benefit. The essence of this law is that the consumer interest is to be protected. It's a macro law, unlike the Consumer Protection Act, which is a micro law to protect the grievances of the consumer, which protects through the market economy the interest of the consumer. But if all of them gang up, all of them form a cartel, and then the cartelization is that none of us will sell below this price. We had last year instances of cement companies in this country do it. In such a case, will the system be helpless, or will there be a forum like the Competition Commission which will have the jurisdiction to pass appropriate orders to crack and break a cartel of this kind? Other cases of anti-competitive practices besides cartelization in terms of prices is also to limit the supply. We find in the international oil arena at times, the oil supplies are restricted as a result of which the prices go up. So if you restrict supplies, that is one way of saying to it that the consumer interest is adversely affected. The third is, you can divide markets to eliminate competition. You can say somebody will sell only in the east and somebody will sell only in the west, so that in the respective geographical markets, competition is eliminated. Now this is per se an anti-competitive practice. Other instance of anti-competitive practices which is being given is collusive bidding or bid rigging in matters of contracts. Now these are 4 which are per se regarded as anti-competitive. they are prohibited, they will be penalized. But there can be other market practices also, in addition to these four, which by the rule of reason can be anti-competitive. That is the essence of the first part of this law. And I feel that this is one aspect which requires to be at the earliest to be put in force. The second component of this bill relates to size. But unlike the MRTP Act, it doesn't consider size per se as evil. Market dominance is not itself prohibited. It is the abuse of market dominance which really has been considered to be objectionable as far as this law is concerned. And one of the illustrations which is given here is predatory pricing. Predatory pricing is indulged in by a very large corporation which may have deep pockets. It can sell below the cost price. By doing so, it can eliminate competition. And once competition is eliminated, it can create a situation where it can exploit the market. These are two aspects of this bill which are authorities now, which are jurisdictions vested in the Competition Commission, which I don't think there is any dispute about. But one area which Mr. Pranab Mukherjee did mention, there is a considerable debate on that area, which is with regard to amalgamations and mergers. This has been referred to as combination control as far as this bill is concerned. Now, this is a debate which has gone on in several jurisdictions. But in most large economies, the principle that they have followed is that if the effect of a merger or an amalgamation is to have an appreciable adverse effect on competition, that is to say, if there are 4 large scooter manufacturers in India and they decide to all merge, and therefore the effect of the merger is that they eliminate competition altogether, and the consumer who would have benefited from the competition in terms of quality, in terms of prices, is denied that, should then the system be helpless and permit such a merger to take place? Now, in advanced Western economies, they have been quite rigid about this provision, and there has been a considerable debate as far as the industry in India is concerned, whether this provision was really required at this stage of our economy in this particular bill or not. There have been examples in several countries, over 100 countries have the competition or the antitrust law, and a number of them actually provide for prior permission of the antitrust authority or the competition authority before a merger or amalgamation can take place. In this law, therefore, the rules of merger and amalgamation, the Minister of Finance has made them quite liberal in the first instance. There is a threshold limit which is provided, and I saw one of the figures which was given out in an article written by one of the advisors to the CII. If those threshold limits are taken into consideration, at the current prices, there are only, at the current rates, there are not going to be more than 70 to 75 Indian corporations which are going to get covered under that. One, the threshold limit is reasonably high. Two, besides the threshold limit being reasonably high, you must be in the same product amongst those 75 companies to merge together. And the third, that the effect of that merger would be to eliminate competition. And one of the factors which has to be kept in mind today is that competition does not get eliminated merely by the merger, because a large number of products are such, because of tariff barriers, they are internationally available. And if a product is available even from outside because of the reasonable tariff barriers, that's one of the considerations which has been kept in mind. Prior permission before merger and amalgamation, which could have discouraged some mergers and amalgamations, it has been made optional. The corporations have been permitted to give an advance notice, but if within 1 year after the merger, if they don't, that's in the form of an advance ruling. They can go, they have an option to go to the Competition Commission and say, well, I intend to merge. Please give me an advance ruling whether this will have an appreciable adverse effect on competition or not. Alternatively, if they don't choose to do that, then within 1 year of the merger, that's the 1 year is the limit when the curtains will go down, the Competition Commission itself within the first 1 year can say, has there been an appreciable adverse effect on competition? In such situations, a difficulty would necessarily arise, because once a merger has taken place, then to crack up a corporation and then unscramble the egg becomes a lot more difficult. As we have seen in America happening in the Microsoft case itself recently, that this is one difficulty which does arise in these cases. Therefore, there are two provisions in this law which I find which are very interesting. The first provision is in clause 1 itself, which says that this shall come into force only in gradual stages. Our economy is at a stage where we need a lot of advocacy as far as competition is concerned. Therefore, one suggestion which I would like to give to the Honorable Finance Minister is, there is stage 1 is the advocacy function. Stage 2 is the stage when provisions relating to amalgamations, provisions relating to anti-competitive practices, those relating to abuse of dominance come into force. And stage 3, as the free market economy has grown further, the last chapter relating to amalgamations and mergers comes into force at that stage when the economy is more prepared for a provision of this kind. There is one more provision which is going to create a lot of interesting situations which will arise. That is clause 32. Clause 32 gives the jurisdiction to India's Competition Commission of acts which take place outside India, but the impact of those acts is on the Indian market itself. Now, a lot of people ask this question, by this provision, would you be controlling what goes on in foreign markets if it's going to impact the domestic market itself? Questions have been raised. I've read some questions in the media also in this connection. But this is peculiar now to this law almost in several jurisdictions in the world. Because of the globalization of the economy itself, products produced elsewhere are making themselves available in other jurisdictions. And once competitions get eliminated outside, or there is an anti-competitive practice outside, it may have an impact on the domestic market itself. We remember the case 2 years ago, I think relating from the GE and the Honeywell merger, where the competition authorities in the United States permitted it. But the European Union took a plea that you may have merged in your own jurisdiction with permission, but the impact of this merger is felt in our market also, and we are not going to accept this. Therefore, the European Union itself took a different view, and this clause 32, in that sense, is a provision, and we'll have to see as the law grows how this provision gets worked out itself. One final comment, sir, with regard to the setting up of these regulators. Shri Pranab Mukherjee mentioned a very vital point. I am almost convinced after seeing the performance of a large number of our regulators that number of regulators and their functions, jurisdictions are going to increase. The regulator is going to be as good as the persons who man these regulators. Unfortunately, we have got into a tradition now in the last few years where all regulatory mechanisms are becoming parking lots for retired judges or retired civil servants. A large number of them have absolutely no idea with regard to the functions of those regulatory mechanisms. And since these commissions are going to perform a very important function, rather than just be commissions where retired people are to be adjusted and jobs are to be found for some retired persons either from the judiciary or from the civil service, these are areas which relate eminently to the functioning of the market. Unless we make it a point to have a large number of those who understand the market and who understand these areas, the functioning of some of these commissions may eventually run into difficulty. With these words, Madam, I support this bill for approval of this House.
Shri Prabhakar Reddy.